Hi, everybody. Welcome to Versique HR Lab. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. All right, 12 o'clock straight up. We'll wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. One more minute and we'll get started, everybody. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Dardis. Welcome to our 10th Versique HR Lab. We're very excited that you're joining us today. Today's topic of the Versique HR Lab is purpose-driven leadership and how it can affect in engaging work culture. We have 2 very insightful guests that I'm really personally excited about today. But before we get into that, just a little bit about the HR Lab. We hold these labs semi-annually, one in the spring and then one in the winter. And if you've missed our last couple, our aim for the lab has always been to gather human resources leaders in a room is what we originally intended. So we've had to pivot over this last year, but gather human resources leaders to hear stories from human resources leaders, to provide insight to us both personally and professionally. So if you've missed our last 2, our last HR Lab was on the topic of mental well-being and psychological safety in the workplace. So in the light of what we've been going through with COVID and some companies returning to work, very timely. And previous to that, we took on the complex topic of diversity, inclusion, equity, and allyship in the wake of George Floyd. So with what we're going through as leaders here in the next couple of months, with a lot of us guiding our workforces back into the office, I thought this was a very, very timely topic. So first off, before I get ahead of myself, let me say a couple thank yous. First off, thank you to my entire human resources HR consulting team for helping to pull this off. Specifically, Kim Gabriels for helping us track down our dynamic speakers, as well as, and especially, Jenny Crea, who's kind of the godmother of our Versique HR Lab. This was her vision probably 6 years ago, and Jenny works tirelessly to pull this off each time. So thank you for our entire team. Thank you to our Parka sister division as well for helping us pull this off. Versique is a bigger company than just my kick butt HR consulting team. And the individuals that oversee that greater company are 2 co-founders, Chris Ohlendorf and Tony Sorensen. And just a special thank you to those 2 for continuing to support us so we can bring these free HR labs to you twice a year. And then lastly, thank you to our 2 speakers, Blake Elliott and Samantha Hansen. Well, I'd rather probably have conversations with Sam around travel, books, and wine. and I'd rather talk to Blake a lot more about St. John's and football. I will digress, and we will talk about purpose-driven leadership today. And so as I introduce each of these, just a couple of expectations for today. So you'll hear from Samantha Hansen first for about 30 minutes, and she's going to share her story and insights with us. After that, Blake will do the same. Following each 30-minute presentation, we will have a Q&A session at the end. It could last for about 15 to 20 minutes, whatever it merits. We will be collecting questions throughout the lab, either in the chat function or the Q&A function. And then lastly, I will say this: if you hear anything that moves you today, or that you feel is impactful, please pick up your phone and put it out on social media. If you hashtag any of your thoughts with hashtag HR Lab, what we will do in the next couple of days, we will search out those postings and we will select one random post, and Versique would be happy to reach out to that person and provide a $100 donation to the charity of your choice. So let's get started. So with that, Samantha Hansen. Samantha Hansen is the Chief Administrative Officer at North Memorial. Sam, you and I go all the way back to your time at Verifications, Inc. And Sam has served as a leader at HR Optum Insights. She served as an HR leader, the #1 at Children's Minnesota. And Sam is just a brilliant leader that has that unique gift to be able to lead with integrity, focus, and empathy. And she really specializes in transforming and optimizing organizations through its people. So, ladies and gentlemen, one of my favorite leaders I have ever met, Samantha Hansen.
Wow. Chris, thank you. And thank you to the entire Versique team for this opportunity. It's rare and treasured from my perspective that I get to talk to an HR leadership audience. My career, as Chris explained, is one that has spanned across different industries, from consulting to retail into healthcare. But my passion has been like a bright red thread weaving through in HR and the power of HR. I was fortunate enough in my HR career to start off as an HR consulting firm, and working with, at that time, some of the nation's most innovative HR leaders who were transforming their HR functions from the transitioning of back office functions to a trusted outsourcing partner, so that they could position themselves within their organizations to help transform their industries. These were large organizations, but it was very important at that point in my career to see the transformative opportunities that HR brings. Purpose-driven leadership. Second, I think, to ending world hunger is something that we all strive to do. And when Chris, because he is one of my favorite people, reaches out and says, "Hey, we want you to talk about this," I thought, oh, no problem. And then I thought, that's a problem. Like, how do you take something like purpose-driven leadership and concisely engage that remotely, virtually, I should say, for an audience? I'm going to try. And here's where we're going to start. I don't know about you, but purpose-driven leadership and leadership in general, there's so much out there. As Chris alluded, I like to read and listen to the most latest thinking around leadership, how do organizations continue to grow and thrive and change. And there's a lot out there. It can be really overwhelming. You know, the 8 pillars of this and the 3 steps of that and the 5 dysfunctions of that. And when I was preparing for this meeting, I had to quiet that noise and really get clear on what purpose means to a leader. So if you'll give me a little bit of rope on this one, I'd like to welcome you to embrace this analogy. And I want to use a tree. So I'd like you to visualize. It's spring, it's beautiful. Visualize a big maple, and not a little one, but one, 50 years old or so, and the vibrant colors that it represents in the fall. So if you're looking at that maple, let's think about visualizing the roots that go deep. These roots for a leader represent our values. They continue to grow throughout our lifetime. Some of our roots we're not even paying attention to because they're so deep, they're so implicit in who we are. But they ground us, they connect us to water, they connect us to life, they're who we are. The important part for a leader is to recognize those values are underground. And as we are all continuing our personal growth journey, understanding how those values play to our health, just like what roots do to the health of a tree, that is important because values are not purpose, but they do have important influence. I'm going to take you visually to the top of the tree, the canopy, the leaves, the branches that sway in the wind. The canopy really represents, from my perspective, our responsibility to understand our skills, our abilities, what we're learning, what we're innovating, what we're trying. The branches of a tree can come off. They can be hit by lightning. The leaves in a deciduous tree, certainly in this climate, fall off once a year, but they grow back. So the canopy, from our leadership perspective, is our challenge to continue to change, continue to iterate. Our organizations need us to do that. And it's important that we continue to feed the canopy of our leadership model. And also, that's what faces the sun. That's what, through photosynthesis, that's what creates the energy for the being. It's how you show up. It's also how that's where some leaders start. They're all about the flash, right? What's in my canopy? What's happening? That's the beauty of the tree. But attend to the fact that it's not just about the canopy, which leads us to the purpose. So as I'm thinking about what role purpose plays in leadership, I think about the trunk. The trunk of the tree is what is stable. It's the highway connecting the roots to the leaves and back and forth. It's the filter of what's most important. And when you look at a trunk, once cut in half, it also tells you very important things about the being. It tells you how old it is. It tells you where the growth years are, where the less growth years are. It tells you about how the experiences of your life weave together to what is most stable about you. It's what holds you stable in the windstorm. So without diving too deeply into that analogy, from my perspective, sometimes we can confuse our skills and abilities of a leader with our values, with our purpose, particularly when we are in times of crisis or are chewing through a particularly challenging situation. But that analogy helps me to think about what's important, how do these things work together? And then it works for my own development, but then also it helps me when I'm coaching other leaders and providing feedback and separating, understanding the interdependencies, but then separating purpose from values, from skills, abilities, and talents. So I was asked to talk about how purpose drives me as a leader. And again, very hard question. I'm going to tell a story about my dad. Very early, about the time I took that consulting role, and he found out that it was for HR consulting. He's like, HR? Like you could be in operations, you could be in sales, like you got to be on the front line of the business. And I said, Dad, I disagree. And I was so young at the time. I really didn't have this purpose fully formed. My trunk was about this big at that time. But I said, Dad, I think it's about the people. And you can have really great operations. You can have the best quality assurance. You can have the best technology, whatever it is. But if you don't understand the people, that is where an organization misses the opportunity to reach its full potential. And that, with those rose-colored glasses and a late 20-year-old, that's how I started my HR career. Another point on that, another ring, I guess, in my own trunk was when I went to Best Buy and had the opportunity to go out of consulting and actually go into the client side. It was my first HR role inside an organization. And it was an incredibly valuable time to be there because it was where Best Buy was shifting its focus to customer centricity. And what was absolutely amazing to me was the need to focus on the customer and really understand who your customer is and what we needed to do differently as a business to both understand and reflect the needs of our customers. And understanding that not all customers are created the same. And the early days of customer centricity were born. Now, this is 20 years ago, so I know for many of you sitting in the audience, you're like, hey, welcome, Sam. But this was new stuff then. But for me, again, building my leadership trunk, when I realized that transforming that customer relationship and the success of our business was actually tied to how we changed how we related to our workforce and how we hired, trained, promoted, developed, communicated to, that's what made the difference. For me, it clicked. But it was the power of the success of the organization depended on that very tight relationship between the experience of the workforce and the experience of the customers in a sustainable way. It's interesting, one of the things, Chris, we talked about in preparing for this was, how does purpose-driven leadership show up in times of crisis? And I promised Blake that I wasn't going to talk about COVID response the entire time. This is the place that I do want to bring it in to this conversation. And that is, as a leader in healthcare, and for each of us as human beings on this earth, 2020 was nothing we've seen before. We had lots of skills, but we had not put them to practice, at least in our lifetimes, against this challenge. And in healthcare, we had multiple challenges, very literally life or death. And in the early days of the COVID pandemic, that purpose-driven leadership for this organization showed up in our commitment to being honest and transparent with our team members about every decision and every step of the way. At a time when the organization was bringing in information and having to make decisions on a very, very frequent basis, sometimes hourly. These are the days when an executive order sent a quarter of our team members home to work remotely, the folks who are in the supporting roles, but left 3/4 of our workforce on the front lines without a lot of information about what it was going to take to keep them safe with a virus that we knew so little about. These are the days when we didn't even have tests prolifically available. And we had PPE shortages, which had us at sometimes literally doing business with foreign countries, international countries, trying to secure PPE so that our frontline workers could have, our team members could be safe. Asking us to be innovative with technology and equipment that we were using it in ways that no one was trained or used to using. How did we get through that? Well, there were many days where we showed up with a clear and aligned purpose that said, we're going to make the best decisions we can with the information we have at the time, and we're going to be fully transparent about that. And that meant that we use cloth masks in certain circumstances, that again, we guided people through. And that sounds really obvious now, standing a year later. But at the time, it was a commitment that we started our incident commands every day, our incident command meetings every day, reminding our leaders of what our core purpose was. And then it allowed us to be nimble and to be able to focus and bring our organization along. We ended up furloughing a healthy percentage of our non-clinical care team members. We brought them back. We reduced wages. We put the organization and the workforce through more trials and tribulations than we might expect in 5 years. And at the end, in Q4 of 2020, our engagement scores went up. Our turnover rate was stable to low. We managed to bring the organization through, and our clinical quality scores actually raised. Our customer experience scores are at the highest as they've been in 5 years. And these are times where we had, on most days, we're doing things that we had no playbook for. What we had was purpose. So the common thread is creating communication and trust and understanding what's really driving your customers and what's really driving your workforce, and being willing to take that risk. That leadership, purpose-driven leadership, is not about knowing the answers. It's about being willing to explore the answers and the best solutions with, not to, those key stakeholders. From an HR perspective, we typically are the architect of change. It's our responsibility to bring people along, and change is inevitable, but we are responsible. HR is responsible for change with a purpose. You can tell by my language that I still feel a deep kinship with HR. So I want to note my own language. So I was also asked, what can, as HR professionals, what can you do to build purpose-driven leaders and thus engage cultures? And I have just a couple of things. One is, again, help leaders get clear on their purpose and how that directly or indirectly influences how they show up. Don't fall for the trap of, you can be a great leader just following these 3 things, these 8 pillars, etc. It's about connecting what's most important to the organization with the innovative ideas that you will continue to bring to the organization. Move from flavor of the month to, these are the new ideas that are going to continue to fill our toolkit of opportunities for both our organization and our leaders. See, the tree analogy applies more as well to an organization as it does to individuals. Your organization's purpose should be clear, steady, and be that filter of the nutrients that keep it strong for years to come. Your values are your roots. Be clear that your values support your purpose. And the canopy are all of the initiatives, all of the new skills and abilities that are expected to change. Just as leaves fall in the fall and grow back in the spring, continual learning is an expectation. It's not a sign of instability. Our job in HR is to make sure that those initiatives continue to tie in sequence to the purpose and the values. Next thing is, again, tying workforce and customer insights into solid business strategies. Chris will know this. One of my hottest electric fences is when I'm coaching or talking to leaders, HR leaders who say, I want a seat at the table. You have a seat at the table. You actually run the table because you have 2 of the critical assets for any organization. I don't care what industry you're in, and that is the people. You know what the workforce strategies are to optimize what is delivered to the customers. And our job in HR is to tie those knowledge and the insights of what our workforce and our customers need to the business strategies that drive growth and revenue. The third is never stop learning. Always be committed to learning as not a destination. It's a continued practice. You may be very good, and I'm sure we all are, and we all have our strengths. Our job is to continue to explore them, be curious about them, understand what we can do for ourselves and others, because our organizations are not static. If they are, that's a whole different topic. But force yourself, force is a strong word, challenge yourself to hear the stories of your customers and your workforce in unique ways. One of my favorite ways is by shadowing. In any organization that I'm in, I am known for shadowing. A couple weeks ago, I was shadowing with an environmental services team member, And I was with them for half a day, and I saw how they interacted with our customers, and I saw how where their barriers were, and the special experiences that they are committed to giving to the people who are in our hospital. And it's hard to learn that by episodic check-ins. Walking a mile in their shoes has a tremendous value. And then what's the equivalent of that with customers? Making sure that their stories back up your data. Do your surveys, do all of the other things, but make it multidimensional so that you can really, truly understand that customer segmentation data by having a name and a face behind it, or many. And lastly, never stop believing you're extraordinary. You're the curator of what makes each organization unique. And that is its people, its workforce, and its customer relationship. So the last question, and I'm going to come in my 20 minutes. What separates good from great leaders? Chris, I have to tell you, I have been chewing on this for about 2 weeks. And I have 3 things. One is our role as connectors and communicators. As you can probably tell, it's for me, it's very important that we continue to tell the stories of our workforce and our customers as it relates to building business strategies and driving the prioritization of those strategies. Patrick Lencioni, I think that's how you say his last name, he's the author of The Advantage and 5 Dysfunction in Team. In his last book, one of the things that he said is the job of a leader is as a chief reminder officer. And I love that because how frequently do we all think, my gosh, I've communicated that. How come it's not sticking? And our job is to continue to be almost thesaurus-like in the key strategies of our organization and continue to remind people why those are important. The next one is balancing pace and drive. It's very important to drive, particularly in fast-paced organizations that we are all in. We have to continue to change. It's the leader's responsibility to be that meter of pace and drive. And an analogy that I use is a father and a small son walking down a beach together, holding the father grasping the son's hand. The pace that they walk is the pace of the son, not the pace of the father, because otherwise the son can't keep up. And while we don't want to regress to the slowest person in the organization, it's a great visual reminder for me that we have to bring people along, and sometimes we have to meet them and encourage them to go at the pace that's possible. And then lastly, I have a personal commitment to leave each interaction, each team, each organization a little better than I found it. And that has worked really well because it can be moments like this. It can be individual moments, or it can be making very difficult prioritization decisions or shifts for an organization. But our job as leaders is to make each event moment better than we left it. And I'll leave you with an analogy. I'm an avid hiker. That's where my passions are. And as you leave each, it's kind of an unwritten rule, 2 rules of the hike. One is leave each trail better than you found it. And leave behind your tools to help the next hiker. And that shows up in a couple of ways. There's trail angels that leave things for the next hiker coming by. You have an extra snack. You have something you can leave for the next hiker. Also, you'll notice on trailheads, if you hike, that there's oftentimes walking sticks leaning up against the trailhead. And that's a symbol from one hiker to the next that this stick helped me in the difficult parts of the hike. And it's my wish to you that this will help you as well. And as leaders, we carry that same commitment to each other, to leave each other better than we were before we were together. Chris, thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful, Sam. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all that insight. And I love the tree metaphor. I love that. Values are not purpose. And the trunk needs to be the purpose of your organization. That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. So to our next speaker, Blake Elliott. So those of you that know me, I graduated from St. John's, and I'm a bit of a zealot, and I refuse to apologize for it. So I am going to make it a big deal that Blake's a Johnny too. But he's so much more than that. Blake is an amazing entrepreneur and leader. He has a truly inspiring story. How Blake has co-founded 3 separate companies that all lead with helping others, whether it's physical deficiencies, whether it's opioid addiction, or whether it's Rumi, or whether it's helping individuals connect people who want to help with people who need help through Bridges of Minnesota, North Star Behavioral Health, and Rumi. Blake Elliott is truly making a difference in people's lives and in the Twin Cities community. So, ladies and gentlemen, Blake Elliott.
Thanks so much, Chris, Jenny, and Versique for asking me to be here. I'll start with some vulnerability. For one, following Sam as a speaker is it's like following Obama. I mean, you're a great orator, Sam. So thank you for that, and thank you for the insights. I got to be honest. There are 2 things that kind of terrify me, and I really struggle with. One of them is public speaking. One of them is reflection. And so, this is I guess an opportunity for me to do something that's a little scary. And I think as a leader, that first off, that's important for all of us to do is to kind of put ourselves out there and to do something that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. So here we go. When talking with Chris and Jenny and the Versique team about how to go about this talk and what would be valuable and what I should be thinking about, there was a relatively simplistic message that I heard, which is tell your story. Of course, interweave purpose and mission and culture, but really tell your story. And as Sam mentioned, there is a lot written about and talked about in the idea of purpose-driven leadership and mission and why we do the things we do. And so when I reflected on this, how do I tell my story? And quite honestly, how do I, talk about things that haven't been already written about and talked about, and maybe a lot of these people haven't heard about. So just like Sam said, when she started her talk about have a little patience with me on her tree analogy, which was great, by the way. Have a little patience with me, because I'm going to kind of start in my childhood and as I age, and Sam, another parallel there, Sam brought it up about her dad, but as I age, I realized that, so much of who I am can be traced back to my upbringing and who I was when I was a little kid. And so much of that can be traced back to my parents. And so I grew up in a small town in the middle of Minnesota called Melrose, very middle class parents. And I have a my mom, and she is, I would say, like, in my view, of course, biased view, the definition of purpose, the definition of passion, the definition of mission. We finally got her to retire after 48 years of teaching. She hit her rule of 90 or whatever that is for retirement, like 14 years before she actually retired. But we finally got her to retire. She taught English, speech. I apologize to my mom every time I give a speech, because a lot of it didn't transfer, let's just say. But and she loved theater and musical, and she taught local community and community theater. And so when she would do musicals 3 times a year, she would be working 15 hours a day, and through her 48 years of teaching, she was able to impact thousands of people's lives. And she had achieved such consistency and a high level of success for so long that our little town actually named part of the high school after her and the auditorium after her. And the ability to impact those kids' lives, the ability for her, I could see it every day growing up, that this wasn't work. It wasn't like, wake up in the morning, drudge off to my job. This was the definition of, the embodiment of find what you love and never work another day in your life. And so, I got to see this beautiful, shining example of mission and purpose. And then my dad, who unfortunately is no longer with us, kind of the antithesis, the exact opposite of that story, where he really bounced around from job to job, and ultimately kind of landed for most of my childhood as a police dispatcher for the city, and had to work overnight sometimes, had to work weekends sometimes. And for him, work was hard. Work was work. And he really worked hard for us as kids. He worked hard for baseball gloves and for new school clothes and for mortgage payments and college tuition. And it was this very different view and role modeling of what work is. And why am I going into such detail about my parents talking about purpose-driven leadership? I do think parenting now, as a parent of 4 kids, I think parenting does have some great parallels to leading people in a professional sense. And I was able to see the obvious role model that was my mom for purpose-driven leadership. She loved her job. It was clear she was making a difference to many, many people. But my dad, at first blush, might look like the cautionary tale and what not to do. But I think as I get older, I think I learned just as much from my dad and his experiences. And what I mean by that is he sacrificed so we could chase our dreams. He sacrificed so much so we didn't have to sacrifice as kids and as young adults. And we would all love our professional careers to be full of days in which you are loving what you're doing. You're changing the lives of hundreds of people, and you're having the days go by in the snap of a finger because you're so engaged and into what you're doing. I think that if you only have those elements, or if you're looking at leadership from those lenses, you're not going to go from good to great. I think if you don't, there needs to be a heavy dose of sacrifice. And I think for a lot of us now that are in leadership positions, you see that sacrifice is just as important as purpose and drive and loving what you're doing, and having that heavy dose of doing things that maybe you're not super excited about. And in order to achieve really high levels of leadership, I think you need to embrace that sacrifice and that grit and that resiliency. And I'll try to interweave some COVID things with this talk as well. But of course, I think we've all learned that in the last year. This year has been harder than any of us wanted it to be. And having some elements in our leadership cocktail of sacrifice, I think is really something that makes a well-rounded leader. And so kind of continuing on the chronology here, as I got older, went off to college, there was a huge inflection point in my life and my family's life that I think, changed me and changed me as a leader, changed me as a person. And unfortunately, my younger brother had his driver's license for about a month, 16 years old, driving on a country road, and ends up getting in a single car accident. And as a brother, as a parent, the worst news you can get. And he's airlifted to Regions Hospital in St. Paul, and ultimately very touch and go for a long time, and ultimately ends up with this very significant brain injury. And Adam prior to the accident and Adam after the accident are very different people. And so it threw us into this disability services world that as a 23-year-old at the time, I didn't have any experience with. It is kind of this underworld. And as much as this experience was obviously very traumatic for my brother and my entire family on a personal level, silver linings, it was able to expose me to a world that I had no exposure to, which is how people with disabilities in Minnesota and how people with disabilities around the country live. And so I was lucky enough over the last several years now to start several companies, as Chris mentioned. And I love the opportunity to talk about the people we serve and our industry, because I do think that it's a little misunderstood, and it's not in the in the normal lexicon or in the normal vision of a lot of folks. And so we have a company, Bridges, and Bridges supports people with disabilities. They might have serious and persistent mental illness. They might have brain injuries like my brother. They might have intellectual developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, autism. And a quick history, but up until about 1980, we served in the state of Minnesota, we served people that had disabilities where their family couldn't care for them in like large state hospitals, large state institutions. And there's a lot written and reported on about how kind of terrible those situations actually were for people, where you'd have, an 8-year-old that maybe had severe autism and mom and dad couldn't care for them, and they'd live the next 70 years, 60 years in a state hospital with hundreds, or in some cases thousands, of other people with disabilities, segregated from society in a locked setting out in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. And so, luckily we've made some changes as a state and as a country. And in the early 80s, we started to get rid of the state hospitals where people lived indefinitely and moved to what's most widely known as kind of the group home system. And so, Bridges supports people in the community in group homes. And, just one kind of quick example, we serve an individual, his name's Harry. And Harry, when we started working with him, was homeless. And we actually had to track him down. We knew he'd spent some time at Mission, and we had gotten a call from Regions Hospital, where the year prior to us serving him, he had spent 200 nights in the emergency room at Regions Hospital. And Harry was 55. He had significant schizophrenia. His kidneys were failing him. Anytime he needed a warm meal or a warm bed or dialysis, he would go into the emergency room, and he was causing some problems with the police and the community as he was dealing with his mental illness and being homeless. And so we were able to connect with Harry, get him into a home and provide him, high quality healthcare and supervision and services, but also, really just improve his life in a very meaningful way. He was able to connect with his family. So that's just a little bit about Bridges. North Star, as Chris mentioned, serves individuals with opioid addiction. And of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but there is still an epidemic going on in our country, which is opioid addiction. And so many individuals, especially over the last 12 to 15 months, with the stress of COVID, are overdosing and engaging in unhealthy chemical use. And so we serve people in treatment centers and outpatient and inpatient centers, outpatient centers, and a network of sober homes. And our commitment with North Star is to bring high quality evidence-based care to a socioeconomic population that previously wouldn't be able to access that. So what does that mean? It means we're dealing with individuals that are homeless, individuals that are in encampments. We've been doing a lot of work in the encampments, individuals that are uninsured or on state insurance. And again, just a very quick story. We have an individual that we served about 3 years ago named Archie, and Archie was homeless for 2 years prior and had a tough time putting together any sort of job history and career, and went into our inpatient treatment center and came out, and for the last year and a half has actually worked for Bridges and done an amazing job supporting people with disabilities, and just an unbelievable success story. And then the third, and I'll kind of wrap up through this, but the third company, Rumi is RUMI, and it's a play on the word roommate, but it's also named after a 13th century Persian poet, and Rumi's most famous expression is, "What you seek is seeking you." And I think that's exactly what we are trying to do in terms of helping individuals with disabilities find live-in caregivers. And I talked a little bit about the evolution from the state hospital system to the group home world in disability services. And what we're hoping for Rumi to be, and we're seeing signs that it really is that it's this next evolution using technology to help people with disabilities get out of group homes and live truly integrated in the community, not in a 4-person group home with 3 other people that are disabled with staff coming in and out, but really matching up with somebody and sharing a life with somebody in a very meaningful way. And so we're super excited about the work that we're doing with Rumi. From a purpose standpoint, and a mission standpoint, I think, and I'm sure Sam can agree, we got it pretty easy. We do. We have it pretty easy in the fact that what we do is so directly connected to, and so obvious in terms of framing like what our mission is. People in our organization, no matter what level they're in, are seeing those examples of helping somebody that was homeless, helping somebody that was in the psych floor of a hospital for 6 months, helping somebody that, had overdosed 6 times in the last couple months. But what we try to do, consciously do, is make sure that we are continuing to shine a spotlight on that, because there is still risk, even in an organization like ours, in an organization like Sam's, where all of a sudden the thing becomes like a process. The thing becomes, something that it shouldn't. And what I mean by that is the thing always has to be great care in changing people's lives that have disabilities, great care in changing people's lives that have chemical dependency. And in the minutia of the day-to-day business and work, and whether it's in HR or different operations or finance or wherever, what can we do to keep bringing it back to why we're really here? And if we don't consciously do that as leaders, if we don't consciously shine a spotlight on that, you're going to have people that come to work for us because their light is shining because of that purpose. And that light starts to dim a little bit, because the thing becomes, you got to hire this many people, or you got to keep overtime at this low, or you got to grow your business at this rate. And you can't lose sight of what we're really doing and how we're really impacting people, and making sure that gets to every corner and crevice within your organization. And so, a couple other things I want to talk about with that as well, in terms of building engaging culture. Our organizations are for-profit. They're not non-for-profit, and a lot of healthcare and a lot of social services are non-for-profit. And we consciously made that decision. And we talk a lot about this culturally as well, is our profit doesn't define us. It sustains us. And so it is really important for us culturally to be running good businesses. And I just mentioned it's important for us to be sending this message of why we do what we do in terms of changing people's lives, and that can't be lost. But also, it's important for us to run solid business. And I think we've been lucky enough to run businesses that allow us to do something very creative and innovative, such as Rumi. And we again have very big aspirations and hope that Rumi can change the landscape for thousands of people with disabilities and their families and their live-in caregivers that are living with them. We couldn't do that if we weren't running successful businesses. With COVID in the last 14 months, we noticed a lot of our employees getting very stressed about childcare closings and school closings. Because we were running successful businesses in a very short time period, we were able to open up free childcare for all of our employees. And to be able to take a certain situation like that and pivot quickly, allocate resources and move on that, and is really extremely important to us. And so that can't get lost in it as well. And the other thing I'd like to just talk about for a minute or two, Chris had prepared some of the questions, and Sam mentioned this as well, is, what makes leaders move from that good to great perspective. And I'm stealing it from an author, I believe his name is John Maxwell, who talked about 5 levels of leadership. And as he talked about 5 levels of leadership, he mentioned that the 4th level, and he described this as the hardest level, is going from being a really strong leader to going from being a really strong leader to being a really strong leader that can train, teach, and develop other leaders. And, this is something that is extremely important to me, and it's a very much a work in progress. But if I can sharpen my tools to be able to leverage my skills and help other people be great leaders as well, the impact that I can have on an organization, the impact that I can have on my mission of improving people with disabilities lives and improving people with chemical dependencies lives, just gets multiplied significantly. And so, again, I just thank you guys for listening and appreciate all the work you do. And I thank Chris and Jenny as well for the opportunity.
You bet. Well done, Blake. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, for opening up about your life and growing up, and really sharing with the purpose, with the impact that you're making with the lives of the individuals within disability services. So, you guys, we have a couple minutes to go, and so we've had a couple questions come in. And I've been taking notes here, and I'm going to allude back to a couple of the things that we've talked about. Blake, you just got done talking about how really good leaders can help bring other leaders along the way as well. Sam, you talked about in your metaphor about the canopy, and how a canopy, as you're a leader, changes. So you think about when we were leaders early on in our career for the first time, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we tried to emulate what we had seen. If you would fast forward now, and thinking about how you were showing up as a leader pre-March 2020, and how your canopy has changed right now because we have went through, because what we went through over the last year, how has COVID kind of edited your leadership canopy? Sam, we'll start with you.
I have so many simultaneous thoughts entering my head. I'm going to go, I want to focus, I think, more on the knowing what you don't know. Chris, you and I talked about a recent read that we both had, Adam Grant's Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And so frequently as leaders, I'll speak for myself, the pressure to feel like you have to have the vision or direction, and that the other people need you to articulate it. While we can't be rudderless as leaders, but the power of knowing what you don't know and being transparent with that actually creates a stronger bond to finding the solution around that problem. And that was exhibited so frequently through the COVID learning opportunities that we had last year. I think that's my most important learning and difference.
That's great. Blake, how about you? How have you evolved as a leader over this past year?
Yeah, two thoughts that jump to my mind. I think COVID, like any stress, exposes you. It exposes you as an individual, you as a leader, and it exposes your character and your values in a way that pre-March 2021 probably didn't. And so I think that I hope I was up for that challenge, and I hope that people that worked with me or had relationships with me before and after COVID see the same person. And I really strongly feel that they do, but I think it exposes you. That's number one. The other one is again, follow me for a second, but we've always talked about it in our roles of serving people with disabilities and serving people with chemical dependency issues. When they are struggling the worst is when they need us the most. That's when and sometimes in our businesses, as paradoxical as it is, it's the opposite. Is if somebody's relapsing, we're kicking them out of our treatment facility, or if somebody that has behavioral challenges is acting really behavioral, they're getting discharged from programs. And I think where we've had a lot of success is kind of diving right in when people are struggling the most. As our customers, they need us the most. And I think the same is true from a leadership standpoint during COVID. A lot of people have been struggling with this, rightfully so. And as leaders, we need to dive in even more and support them in ways that we would never have thought of 15 months ago.
Well said. The question from Nicole, and this is a tough question. As I read it, I'm like, how would I do that? Blake, you alluded to good leaders are able to create other leaders. The question from Nicole is, how can you help leaders define their values? And then I'm going to add on to that, or can you? Sam, any insight there?
Yeah, I will admit I'm a Brene Brown fan. And in her toolkit, sorry, we have a helicopter taking off over my office. So
Don't hear it. I don't hear it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's very important that you define your values. Using my analogy, if you don't know what your root system is, it will surprise you. And it will show up in your choices and how you lead and how you decide to grow your canopy without you even knowing. It's important that we uncover and understand our implicit and explicit values. Brene Brown has a super easy tool. It's on her website that is a list of your values and encouraging people to select a handful of those and then talking about that. And recognizing that the values can grow and change over time. But it's that intentional knowledge of the values that help us to understand the foundation of who we are.
Right.
Yeah, I think the thoughts that cross my mind with that question, it's a very good question, and it's hard for me to verbalize what's going on in my brain, but I don't think there's a need for every employee's values to absolutely line up with the organization's values. So first off, that's the first thing that crosses my mind. Now there is an absolute need for there to be values that person has that don't fly in the face of the organization's values. And so if we as an organization can microphone those values and instill those values as much as possible in our culture and in our work environments, when people that are part of your teams do have those values that truly fly in the face of your organization values, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb. They're going to be really obvious. And then, the next question is, how do you respond? Or maybe more importantly, how does your team respond? Because it can't just be the leader that's running around trying to catch somebody that is having values that are antithetical to the organization's values. It's got to be everybody. And how do you respond in terms of coaching and disciplinary action and termination? As you mentioned, values are a really hard thing to change. And if you do have somebody inside your organization that is just not perfectly aligned with the company's values, but truly their values are flying in the face of who your company is, I think, hopefully if you have a strong culture and strong value system within your organization, people are going to catch that very quickly, and it's going to be obvious that this person isn't a great fit.
Along those lines, Sam, I love what you said about being the chief reminder officer. So this is the last question we have before we wrap up. But within an organization, we do have values within the organization. Blake, you said how important it is to live to those. And Sam, to your point about being the chief reminder officer, what sort of tactics or beliefs have you guys used within your career, within your leadership positions to do that very well? It's got to be more than just stick them up on a wall. How do you continually drip that information to employees?
My goal is to be able to talk to team members when rounding or talking with them and ask them about the values and how it shows up in their teams and themselves, how they make decisions, and have no posters on the wall. I sort of cringe a little bit, unless it's for the customers, knowing what the values are. But it really shows up in, when you're making, and it sounds a little contrite, but it works when you say, gosh, we're going to make this prioritization. I'll use a capital committee meeting I was in just yesterday. And we don't have endless capital, but we're having to prioritize. And one of the things we do is, how does this help us advance our values? How does this decision? And it's kind of just a quick, it's a way that we use to prioritize what we're doing. And it's shorthand, right? Like everybody's like, oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
value X. And it just keeps it real. And then also our behavioral-based interview questions really are around the values and helping to make sure that as people are coming in, they understand like these aren't just magnets and cool mugs. This is really a way of how we lead. And can you give us some examples of how in your current life you're leading that's aligned with those values? And don't have a ton. Like you can't have 15 values, right? It's I think Brene Brown says 5, maybe down to 3. But you know, you have 3 values. You want to make sure that you know what's most important for your organization.
Very good. Very good. Blake, how do you do that?
Yeah, this one's easy to me just because this morning for the first 4 hours of the workday, we had a quarterly. We use the term KRA, key result area. KPI is probably the more typical acronym there, but we had a quarterly KPI meeting with all of our regions, typically coming together under one roof. In this case, it was via Zoom. But you know, and these meetings are about revenue and growth and overtime and you know, open positions and you know, these kind of things within departments that are like these important data points. But within every region, we ask, and by far have gotten the best response. We ask to have an individual that we serve be part of those and come and talk about their story. And their story might be a success story. It might be this great story about how one of our organizations has impacted their life in a very positive way. Their story might be, I'm going to give you guys some feedback. You know, here's my experience, and maybe some of it is good and some of it is not so good. But to have, you know, a meeting like that is, it's an important meeting, you know, to try to embed the people we serve into something like that is just an example of things I think we're always trying to do.
Wonderful. Well, let me close with this. Blake, I love your quote from Rumi, what you seek is seeking you. I once heard the definition of leadership is just simply the ability to influence. And so when I think about leaders who want to influence, I know that me as an audience member listening to you, I wanted that. And so we were seeking that out from you guys. So I think that Rumi quote is very apropos for what just happened here today. Thank you to all our audience for participating. Blake and Samantha, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.